ready to start. I'm ready to start. 2 o'clock. No, not Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. The Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nana Poku, members of the University Senate and the Executive, our guest speaker, Ms. Julie Fredericks, our distinguished panelists, the academics in the university, the students of the university, researchers, dignitaries and conference members from the Gumede conference, our online viewers, and friends of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center. I greet all of you very warmly and welcome you to the city of Durban and to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. My name is Vishal Serban, and I am an academic in the School of Law on the Howard College campus. To open the proceedings, I have great pleasure in inviting Dr. Roshni Pathar, who is a portfolio manager of our special collections and core services at the UKZN libraries. So Dr. Pathar will officially welcome you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarban. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed researchers, and members of the University Executive, it is with great honor that I welcome you to the annual Dr. Phyllis Naidoomemorial lecture hosted by the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So together we gather to reflect on and celebrate the enduring legacy of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo, a recipient of the Order of Luthuli, a courageous and principled leader in South Africa's liberation struggle. Her unwavering dedication to justice, equality, and international solidarity continues to inspire generations of scholars, activists, and citizens alike. Dr. Naidoo's immense contribution to the freedom movement is preserved through her generous bequest of personal letters and political papers to our university. These invaluable documents are housed in a center. They provide a powerful and intimate record of the resistance against apartheid, illuminating the sacrifices, victories, and moral courage of those who fought for a democratic South Africa. The Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, initially established to document the Indian contribution to South African society, has since grown into a globally respected archive for the study of the broader liberation movement. Researchers from around the world visit the center to access unique collections not available elsewhere. Collections that offer critical insight into our national and continental history. We warmly invite you to visit the center, explore its rich archival holdings, and engage with the narratives of resilience, resistance, and hope that have shaped our journey as a nation. So let us honor Dr. Naidoo's legacy, not only by remembering her, but by drawing inspiration from her life to continue the work of building a just and humane society. Thank you for joining us today. This lecture delivered by one of her close comrades in the international struggle, ignite meaningful dialogue and renewed commitment to a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patha. So with those words of welcome, please feel very welcome here at this campus, and we hope that you would also get a chance to visit the center a little later after the lecture. We are gathered here for a number of reasons. We are gathered here to remember and recognize that this year marks the 70th anniversary of a gathering that took place on the 26th of June 1955 in Kliptown, where a document called the Freedom Charter was adopted. And we mark the 70th anniversary of that important document in our country's history. Also this year saw the reopening of an inquest into the death of Chief Albert Luthuli. The center has the name, bears his name, and this year marked the reopening into the inquest into his death in 1967. And finally, the purpose of today's gathering is that we remember and we celebrate and we reflect upon the remarkable life of Phyllis Naidoo. Phyllis Naidoo was many things in her life, but first and foremost, she was an anti-apartheid activist and a human rights advocate. In today's lecture and discussion, we will recount how Phyllis Naidoo worked with many of the anti-apartheid activists in South Africa, Dorothy Nyembe, Florence Mkhize, Moses Kotane, Koven Mbeki. Those names are not just the new street names in the city of Durban, but they were the people that brought the fabric together that established our democratic dispensation. Phyllis wrote speeches and helped these activists when they were in danger to flee South Africa in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. In doing so, she suffered horrendously. She suffered bannings, house arrests, injuries from a parcel bomb, and being exiled from South Africa. As a lawyer, she defended Harry Gwala and others, and towards the end of her life, she continued to write and document her experiences of the struggle. To deliver the keynote address, we have Ms. Julie Fredericks, who is an acclaimed writer and producer in film, radio, and audio. As a researcher and writer in popular history, she developed the permanent exhibition of the Nelson Mandela capture site at the museum in Howick, KwaZulu-Natal, from 2015 to 2018. She worked with Johannesburg's Apartheid Museum. She consulted with historians in writing the storyline and curating and organizing the acquisition of the artifacts of that museum. Fredericks is the author of 9 books, including The Unbreakable Thread, Non-Racialism in South Africa, published in 1990. She also authored South Africa, A Different Kind of War. Her first book was None But Ourselves, The Masses versus the Media in the Making of Zimbabwe, published in 1982. She wrote biographies of David Webster and Helen Joseph for Maskew Miller Longman's They Fought for Freedom series, and All Schools for All Children, Lessons from Zimbabwe for South Africa's Open Schools. Fredericks co-founded the independent South African production company Vuleka Productions in 1993 and co-wrote the film Izulu-Lami, My Secret Sky. She was also extensively involved in TV programming, and many of the students here might actually remember one of her famous productions, Takalani Sesame. Fredericks has a Bachelor of Arts from Cornell University and an independent major in communications, and she speaks, writes, and reads in Dutch, French, Zulu, and Afrikaans. But importantly, Julie was a close friend of Phyllis. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have great pleasure in presenting this memorial lecture and welcome Julie to deliver the address.
I'm honored to have been invited to deliver this year's annual Dr. Phyllis Naidoomemorial Lecture. I would like to thank Vishal Subin, the chair of today's session, who sits on the advisory board of the Gandhi Lutuli Documentation Center, with Kiru Naidoo, who was also a liaison in getting me here today, and all of you who've been part of planning and arranging this year's annual lecture. I'm looking forward to interacting with the panelists who will be participating in our discussion today. The views of historian and researcher Dr. Annie Devenish from WITS will be greatly appreciated, given her important focus on gender, identity, and practices of history tied to transformation. I did a lengthy interview with Billy Nair for my book, The Unbreakable Thread, Non-Racialism in South Africa, and I remember meeting him at Diaconia Ecumenical Center back when it was a one-stop shop for the security police and their surveillance and arrest of activists. So it's a privilege to welcome his brother Jay Nair here today, who's joining us on a visit from Canada. The activist and human rights leader Kumi Naidoo stayed with my family in Harare in 1987 when he first fled South Africa, and his family came from Chatsworth to Zimbabwe to see him, including Kumi's brother, Professor Koven Naidoo, back when he was a student leader. So it'll be good to get his perspective as another one of the panelists today. I know that Archie Gumede may be joining us online. He was a key figurehead of the UDF, and although I was in Harare, not Durban, in the 1980s, I felt like I knew him personally through Phyllis due to her strong association with Archie. So I'll look forward to perhaps the input of Donald Mlindwa Gumede, his son and longtime member of Parliament. I'd also like to acknowledge the location of today's event at this campus at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, known previously as the University of Durban-Westville, UDW. It was not only a stronghold of anti-apartheid activism, but was historically important as the site of the National Conference of the ANC in 1991, the very first since its unbanning and the release of its imprisoned leaders. My husband was part of the team that managed the administration of this important conference, and I attended as a journalist. And I can tell you it's very difficult to describe how exciting it was to experience that moment in history here. I first got to know Phyllis Naidoo in Zimbabwe, where she'd relocated from Lesotho in 1983 after the South African military airstrikes on the country which forced her to flee. She'd left South Africa for Lesotho in 1977, and 2 years later, as you'll know, she was among several people seriously injured by a bomb in a parcel sent to her close associate, Father John Osmers, which was apparently intercepted by the South African security police. Among Phyllis's many personal tragedies was the murder of her son Zara Naidoo on the ANC farm he operated outside Lusaka, Zambia in 1989, and the death in hospital of her son Sharad Naidoo Shah in Durban in 1995. Phyllis also had another son who predeceased her, which her daughter Sakthi Naidoo wrote about in a poignant response to an obituary that had failed to mention him. Sakthi revealed that her mother's brief first marriage had produced a son, Nersin, who followed his father to the US and then died in West Africa. My family lived near Phyllis in Harare, and we spent a lot of time together during our years in exile from South Africa. To briefly pause and explain my background and my accent, although I've spent well over half my life in Southern Africa and have learned to speak Zulu and Afrikaans, I was born and grew up mainly in the US, also lived and studied in my father's homeland of the Netherlands, then came to South Africa in 1979 to work as a journalist for the US non-commercial radio network National Public Radio, NPR, which is among the many organizations recently defunded by US President Donald Trump. I was first based in Johannesburg, where I met and married a South African, Stelios Komnenos. We left South Africa for Zimbabwe in 1982 because he refused to do military service and was recruited to the ANC and MK, and because I was denied an extension of my South African visa and work permit. Those were the kinds of controls that were on people, whether they were citizens or visiting or journalists or whatever they were doing. Stelios, my husband, shared a birthday with Phyllis, the 5th of January, which they often celebrated together. When Nelson Mandela was released in 1990 and apartheid began to be dismantled, we all returned to Durban. Phyllis to her hometown, family, and longtime friends, and our family, with our twins born in Harare, to the city of my husband's alma mater, the University of Natal, as it was called then. This meant that we happily continued our friendship with Phyllis for more than 2 decades here in Durban, during which time I became a South African citizen. I now turned to this year's 2 themes for this year's lecture, 70 years of the Freedom Charter and the inquest into the death of Chief Albert Luthuli. There are strong links between Phyllis and these 2 powerful themes. The adoption of the Freedom Charter in Kliptown, Soweto in 1955 was the result of the African National Congress and the Congress Alliance sending their members to consult people throughout South Africa to learn about their dreams for a post-apartheid society. Phyllis strongly believed in the vision of a future non-racial democratic country grounded in equality, justice, and freedom, and kept her belief in the Freedom Charter alive throughout the lull in political action following the crackdown of the 1960s, through the awareness of the Charter and its vision that was revived by the 1980s. She was heartened by the surge of support from those who were called Charterists, culminating in the founding of the United Democratic Front in 1983 with its public embrace of the Freedom Charter. The grounding of its founding principles in the Constitution of the New South Africa was especially important to Phyllis because of her training and work as a lawyer. Now, although the Freedom Charter is often associated with purely domestic policies, its concluding section deals with foreign policy. Entitled, "There Shall Be Peace and Friendship," it states that South Africa shall strive to maintain world peace and the settlement of all international disputes by negotiation, not war, specifically calling for cooperation with other African states. One of the roles that Phyllis played during her time in Zimbabwe was in making links with the international community in Southern Africa. Since she was so well known and respected, diplomats as well as visitors from all over the world were keen to hear her views about South Africa. Phyllis showed a steadfast commitment to the frontline states, the Southern African countries bordering and near South Africa, which came together in the 1980s as the Southern African Development Community, SADC. She understood the contribution of Southern African countries to the struggle against apartheid from personal experience and published a book in 1992 about the South African military's attacks on Lesotho's capital, Maseru, Lerona Rabatu, Sotho for We Are Also People, an account of the 1982 Maseru massacre. Phyllis cared deeply about the suffering of the people as a result of their government's support for the anti-apartheid struggle, where she had lived in Lesotho and Zimbabwe, and also in Eswatini, Swaziland as it was called then, Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, Angola, Namibia, and Tanzania. She did not hold back in expressing her vehement opposition to many Western countries' policies towards Southern Africa, especially of U.S. foreign policy under President Ronald Reagan. Yet at the same time, she had many close friends from the U.S. This should not be seen as a contradiction, but as evidence of her worldview. She saw you as a person, not as part of a group. She saw racial policies as part of a system, not a particular person's opinion. It would be a betrayal of Phyllis's convictions, however, not to note that 70 years after the adoption of the Freedom Charter, its vision is still to be fully realized, notably in the terms of economic transformation. Phyllis would be proud of the political achievements of the South African government in the years since her passing, but would be disappointed by the poor turnout in the 2024 elections, where nearly 60% of our country's eligible voters did not vote. The second of the two themes for this year's lecture is the inquest into the death of Chief Albert Luthuli, who in 1960 became the first Nobel Peace Prize winner from Africa. One of several reopened inquests into suspicious deaths during apartheid, testimony so far has included the debunking of the South African government's claim in 1967 that Luthuli was killed on the railroad tracks by a passing train near his home in Groutville. A steam train expert concluded that he was assaulted and his body taken to a railway track so it would look like he was hit by a train. Phyllis would be heartened by this continuing effort to strike a blow against impunity and uncover the true cause of the death of this important South African historical figure. There are many further connections between Phyllis Naidoo and Albert Luthuli. Months after the adoption of the Freedom Charter, Luthuli was among the 156 leaders of the ANC and the Congress Alliance who were arrested and prosecuted in the infamous treason trial that took place in Pretoria from 1956 to 61. Phyllis published a book in 2006 about this landmark trial called 156 Hands That Built South Africa, with several pages devoted to Luthuli, one of the many books she wrote about the history of South Africa. Luthuli's acceptance speech for his Nobel Prize was written in part in Phyllis's flat in Durban, which served as a meeting place for activists from Moses Kotane to Koven and Mbeki. The South African government conferred the Order of Luthuli on Phyllis Naidoo in 2003 for her outstanding contribution to human rights and the struggle against apartheid, and in the final one of Phyllis's many links to Luthuli, it was in Durban's Nkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital that Phyllis passed away from a heart ailment in 2013. In preparing this talk, it's been fulfilling to speak personally with so many people who knew Phyllis well, in Durban, in various parts of South Africa, and throughout the world. The main view about Phyllis that I heard over and over again was about how principled she was in her beliefs, that she had integrity, that she was held in high esteem by a wide range of people, nationally, regionally, and internationally. Undeterred by her banning in 1966, with the order renewed after 5 years and adding house arrest until 1976, she used this period to study law, qualified as a lawyer in 1973, and joined a law practice with Archie Gumede as soon as she was able to appear in court. She supported detained and banished people, did pro bono legal work, and encouraged her law firm, to hire ex-Robben Island prisoners when others did not dare. In addition to all this work, an even greater part of Phyllis's contribution to South African history were the many books she wrote, biographies not only of famous figures, but also unsung people who were part of the struggle to end apartheid. One of the human rights issues that Phyllis felt especially passionate about and campaigned against, in addition to racial discrimination, was the death penalty, which she wrote about in her first book, Waiting to Die in Pretoria, published in 1990. You'll know that one of her most well-known books was Footprints in Grey Street, published in 2002, with 3 follow-up books about people who lived and worked in this area around the street that was renamed in 2007 after Yusuf Dadoo, who chaired both the South African Indian Congress and the Communist Party. It's interesting to note that when the ANC leadership invited Phyllis to be part of the first Democratic Parliament in 1994, what did she do? She declined. She would have been high on the ANC electoral list, with a position paying a salary and benefits beyond any she'd enjoyed in the past, yet those who knew her well were not surprised at her refusal. As one of the people I spoke to put it, Phyllis knew what many politicians feel they have to do, and she couldn't compromise her own values. Phyllis's interpersonal relations sometimes clashed with her politics in her interactions with white South Africans, whose political views may have been very far from hers or not, because they didn't necessarily always talk politics. Phyllis was a regular at Badger's Restaurant and Coffee Shop, eating breakfast there from when it first was located at Glenwood's Davenport Shopping Center through its move to Helen Joseph Street. The owners and staff of the restaurant, as well as many customers, knew and treasured Phyllis. There was even a sandwich named after her. Quotes of her books were painted on the restaurant's walls, and fittingly, the morning after Phyllis died, we all got calls and we gathered for kind of a wake. Where else but Badger's Restaurant for breakfast? A much bigger Phyllis Naidoomemorial was organized at Durban City Hall, and among the hundreds who attended were the Badgers crew, who confessed after hearing her praised by so many top Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and national officials that they never realized how acclaimed and respected she was. We didn't know she was so famous, they said. We just liked her because she was a great person. Phyllis was down to earth and did not judge people by their credentials. She felt honored that her work was of interest to academics and policymakers, but also she had great respect for ordinary people who she judged by their actions rather than who they were. The presence here of Dr. Devenish, a trailblazer in gender history, made me mindful of the role Phyllis Naidoo played as a woman, her activism, her legal work, and as a researcher in the historical period when she lived and worked. Not only was she very much in the minority being female, she stood out because of how she conducted herself in what was then a male-dominated world far more than today. Phyllis was not cowed by traditions or norms, even, or perhaps especially, with regard to how she dressed. I cannot remember ever seeing her wear anything but trousers, with the only exception being the sari she wore at the funeral of her husband, M.D. Naidoo, when she whispered to me with a wink, "Look what they made me wear." Likewise, for her smoking of cigarettes, something else that women were not supposed to do in public or be seen to be doing, although it was acceptable for men, but Phyllis did as she pleased. She had great respect for others and their values, but Phyllis did as she wanted and was greatly committed to women's rights and advances, but was not a person who was focused on her public image or what others thought of her. I'd like to conclude this talk with a brief exploration of the strongest bond that I shared with Phyllis, and that is our common passion for collecting papers that we consider to be historically valuable. I confess here before you to being a papyrophiliac, the psychological term for a person with an obsessive love of paper, and I believe that Phyllis was one too. She and I collected letters, cards, newspapers, periodicals, memoirs, booklets, programs, pamphlets, and official documents. As per the subtitle of this lecture, From Banned Papers to Robben Island Ticket Stubs, her vast collection of papers even includes the stubs of tickets for the ferry ride from the Cape Town mainland to the island where so many of South Africa's political prisoners were held for so long. I just love that she kept the ticket stubs, and they are historical. Phyllis's house in Harare and her flat in Umbilo were overflowing with papers, and she was always asking my husband Stelios to build her more shelves for her expanding collection of papers and books. For many of Phyllis's closest friends, some of their fondest memories are of the scrapbooks she made for them, from articles she cut from newspapers and magazines, photos, flyers, documents, and other papers. While Phyllis and I both collected papers and wrote about their historical importance, neither of us were academics. I am not. She was a lawyer and activist who became an author, and I started out as a journalist, yet we both shared the firm belief that it is important to save the writings and documents on paper for the sake of history. And many of the papers we collected ended up in the books we wrote. Some of my books were published by academic publishing houses, James Curry Publishers in the UK, and Indiana University Press in the US, but Phyllis chose to publish her books largely outside the conventional publishing houses or academic ones. My relationship with Phyllis's adult children was forged partly through their work with the incipient South African archive of papers and oral histories founded in Harare in 1986. Shah and Sakthi were among those who transcribed the interviews I had recorded with many South Africans, about 200, as part of their work for the Popular History Trust, where exiled ANC stalwarts Derek Hanekom and Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi also worked part-time. All these papers and audio recordings were sent back to South Africa in 1990 to become part of the core collection of the South African History Archive, SAHA, now housed at the University of the Witwatersrand after many years at Constitution Hill. The papers I collected in my journalistic work and in researching 2 books on South African political history, South Africa, A Different Kind of War and The Unbreakable Thread, Non-Racialism in South Africa, are held by SAHA, with many other documents from my collection deposited at the Nelson Mandela Foundation Archive at the Center of Memory in Johannesburg and at the University of the Western Cape Robben Island Mayabuya Archives in Cape Town. And Phyllis, as a strong supporter of Cuba because of its aid to the liberation of Southern Africa, donated many of her books and papers to groups and people in Cuba. This was part of her commitment to international solidarity, which may be seen as particularly relevant now in the context of the Trump administration's policies towards South Africa and other countries not seen to be entirely Western aligned, an attitude that has sparked renewed calls for rebuilding solidarity across the global South. Throughout her life, Phyllis made many contributions to the struggle to end apartheid and to chronicling South African history, most powerfully, I believe, through her vast collection of papers. Given the tremendous contribution that Phyllis made to the South African archive, it is especially meaningful that we are gathered here today at the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, the place where Phyllis's paper collection has found its home. This center has become an important component of the special collections of the University of KwaZulu-Natal in this province where Phyllis was born, lived, and worked for most of her life and died. For many years to come, countless students, researchers, and academics will continue to benefit not only from the sacrifices she made and the books she wrote, but also, and especially for me, from the many papers that she collected. Thank you.
Ms. Fredericks, thank you very much for delivering this memorial lecture and for giving us a first-hand account of Phyllis's life and her relationship with the Freedom Charter and with Albert Luthuli. And I particularly enjoyed your reference to the bond you shared with Phyllis relating to historical papers and ephemera. And I'd like to invite everyone to visit the center where those documents are housed, those stubs, even leaves from certain places were carefully kept in scrapbooks. They will inspire you, and they're just 500 meters away. I thought I might just seize the moment to actually give an account of my own recollection of Phyllis Naidoo. I met her 25 years ago when I was a matric student completing my secondary school education. My school principal invited Phyllis and other activists for an oral history project, and I got a chance to interview her. But she spoke to us as children about the Freedom Charter, about the Constitution, and about human rights. This was just a few years after our Constitution was adopted, and it exposed to me a different side of studying the law. And just the next year, I found myself, like Phyllis, studying law at this university, and I didn't leave after that. Many scholars will visit the archives and interpret and research the life of Phyllis Naidoo, and perhaps maybe those will be future speakers of this lecture. But I think at this present moment, we are particularly glad that you, Ms. Fredericks, was able to give us this lecture and give us a living memory of Phyllis, and for that we are grateful. I'd like to move on to the second part of this lecture, which is a short discussion. And we've curated a wonderful panel of discussants to respond to Julie's lecture and the themes of this lecture. Their own lives and their professions will provide us with a unique lens by which to view the life of Phyllis and her contribution. So I'd like to start off with Professor Koven Naidoo, who is the Global Head of Advocacy and Partnerships at the One Site Eliseo Luxottia Foundation and a former CEO of the Brian Holden Vision Institute. Professor Naidoo is an academic, a former anti-apartheid activist, a political prisoner, an optometrist, and an internationally celebrated public health leader. He was a student of this university on this campus and was the president of the SRC in 1989 at a very volatile time in South Africa's history. He's also the brother of celebrated environmental activist Kumi Naidoo. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Professor Naidoo, to give us a 5-minute response. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Excuse me if I'm uncomfortable. Yeah, I spend more time on that side screaming at the people on this side than standing here and giving speeches. But I got to be careful because my 8-year-old son is sitting at the back, and he asked me when we came about the campus, and I said to him, we protested here. I said it mildly. I didn't tell him what we broke there or what we did, because I just don't want him to duplicate that. In 1987, when we visited Zimbabwe to see Kumi at that time, Kumi said we were at Julie's house, and he said we're going to meet this woman, Phyllis. And I'd heard about her, but to be honest with you, I didn't know much about her at that point. And so we go into this person's house, and there's this nice auntie sitting there. She looks like any other auntie from Chatsworth until she opens her mouth. Okay? She swears very often. She orders the men around her, so, and she commands the room in a way that I'd never experienced growing up in Chatsworth. And that was my first really good sense of, because in the struggle, most of the leaders that we sang about were not women. They were men, right? And we go to Zimbabwe, and here's this woman commanding guys, and this one was in the military wing, this one was head of intelligence, this one was doing... We walked into a kind of meeting. And I think for me it was very impactful to see what strong women leaders in our movement, if given the opportunity to lead. And I say given the opportunity because we didn't always do a good job in the movement. We'd like to think we did, and we're not doing a great job now. And so it was a very awakening kind of experience for me. But the other thing is that she was very militant. And I think we live in a society now where we make excuses for being militant, right? We got to be militant against poverty. We got to be militant against racism. We got to stop kowtowing to the colonialists, the neo-colonialists. We got to ensure that we don't sound like babies when we talk to Trump. We got to show that we retain our dignity when we relate to the rest of the world. And I think that those are the things, that militancy that characterized a lot of the generation of activists from that time is something that we need. And the truth is that many of us who were those militants are less militant now. And so we are part of the problem. I'm not saying that this is about them. It's also about us. Because we try to fit into these neat boxes of a democratic society, and we thought by playing the game of the rest of the world and everybody else around us, we'll get what we want to, and we'll get our people to the promised land. And the truth is, we've probably taken them very limitedly forward compared to what we want. Yes, there's progress, but that progress has been limited. So, and this concept of international, which Julie, and I'm just pulling the themes from your presentation, is that, we tend to focus on specific issues. We don't really understand the world well enough. But the question, as an academic, I ask at the university and elsewhere, what are we doing to interrogate this modern society we live in? In the struggle, let me give you a story. I was at Harvard doing a course, not a big degree, so I'm not showing off, just a small course, okay, on strategic perspectives in nonprofit management at the business school there. And these Harvard lecturers come and they present their perspectives, and I question it innocently. But by 3 p.m. that afternoon, a group of 10 Americans, I was the only African in the room, approached me and asked me, we need to have a discussion with you. And I say, about what? And they say, we want to know how you know these things. And I said, well, don't feel bad about yourselves, because we learned this on the ground. We didn't learn it at universities. All those questions, these were academics giving us, at Harvard Business School, thinking they understand the whole world when they had never put their foot out of America, some of them, right? And so I was challenging their perspectives. And I was telling these Americans, the great thing about the struggle in South Africa, it was a high level of intellectualism. It was a high level of militancy. And most importantly, it was the highest level of caring. But today, and those things characterized Phyllis's life. But look at us. Our leaders sell us for almost nothing. I served in prison with a comrade who was, when we were on hunger strike, was prepared to give his life. I was shit scared. I hoped I didn't have to die, but he was much braver than me. I did it because the comrades would say I'm a sellout if I didn't go on hunger strike. But he was really committed, much more committed than much more militant than all of us. He got caught for corruption. So I called him. And I say, what happened? And he said, it's because we're close enough from that experience. He said to me that my change happened incrementally. First, I was invited for supper. Then as I'm walking out of supper, the guy offered to buy me a pair of shoes. And he said, the next minute I got sucked into this. But this is strong comrades that have changed in our society today. There's something fundamentally wrong that's happening in our country. And we need to actually address this, stand up to it, and hold people accountable. I asked a comrade the other day, you go to see your mother in Umlazi. Doesn't it move you how bad the conditions are there? Okay? Doesn't it make you want to go back and change the way things operate? But there's something seriously wrong in the values that we have. These are not the values of Phyllis Naidoo. These are not the values that many activists, and including some of our corrupt leaders, had when they were in the struggle. So I think that there's a fundamental need to be more intellectual about what we're doing right now, to understand this. It's not simply a question of greed. It is more complex, and I think that we need leadership that actually addresses it and helps us to understand it and deal with it. But more importantly, when I met Phyllis, she spoke about youth a lot. And I think that is something that we need to realize is fundamental. There was a study done amongst the youth in KwaZulu-Natal asking them, what do you want to become? The most common response was, I want to be a manager. Manager is not a profession. It's a role. Okay? We have now created this elitist vision of what society is. We have shifted our youth away from understanding what hard work is. And we are constantly creating a society that's heading towards self-destruction. Because the reality is that the leadership that exists is not of the Phyllis Naidoo mode. That's not, the interest in youth is how we manipulate them to support us in political movements. The interest in youth is not about building the capacity of youth to interrogate and question us. And those challenges are the real issues that we need to address if we want to honor Phyllis, Naidoo. Non-racialism. Abin Badali sitting at the back, we won the SRC together here. Our SRC, and I've got limited time, there was an amazing human being here called Professor Krika. He was the head of theology. I don't know if anybody remembers him. I went to him and I said, Professor Krika, you're going to help us to transform this university. And he said, how? I said, we can register students of African origin through theology, but we can't get them into the university in the other departments. But we realized as a SRC, there's a rule change 1 month later and you can go into BA. So we registered 5 students. From having 3 students, Professor Krika had 5. The rector called him and questioned him and said, what's happening? He said, I don't know, Prof. The natives have suddenly become religious. Right? Professor Krika helped us. And then we were tested, Abin and myself, Jenison Kosi and others, about what true non-racialism means. We had to combine the militancy of students coming from Soweto with the progressiveness of students coming from Chatsworth, but who didn't want to stone the buses. I like to, but most of them didn't. But the point is that we had to bring all of that together. And within that, build non-racialism. And it wasn't an easy task. And building non-racialism is difficult. Look around this room. We're honoring one of the greatest people in our society. And how many people of African origin are sitting in this room today? Phyllis was not an Indian activist. She was an activist for all of us. She fought for the liberation of all of us. I guarantee you, if a person of African origin is being honored, there'll be hardly any Indians in that, people of Indian origin in that audience. So we can talk about Phyllis and all that, but we've got to start living those values. And the value of non-racialism is something that is critically lacking in our society. And we're not going to be advanced if we don't start addressing the questions of why it's not happening and why we need to. Because even us as activists, I go to activist functions, and there's a mainly Indian activists or mainly African activists in there. Okay, Abin and I are a bit lucky because of that time when that influx happened. We have friends that allow us to be on both sides of it, and we are often at functions. In fact, we party a bit too much because of that, and different types of parties. But we talk about it often, about how racially divided even activists are. So I just want to leave you with that. If we want to honor Phyllis, let's do the things that live up to the values that she stood up for, rather than just talking about what she did. Thank you.
So Koven, thank you for taking 5 minutes and giving us such powerful words and recounting your time, that critical time in the 1980s when you were there. But now our little treat to you now is a very diverse panel. So now from having someone who was an activist, an alumnus, we now have someone who was a notable historian. And so I have great pleasure in welcoming the historian and researcher with an interest in gender, activism, and identity in the global South, and how the practice of history can be harnessed to transform societies. Dr. Annie Devenish teaches in the Department of History at the University of Witwatersrand, and it gives me pleasure to welcome her to also provide a response.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I very sadly never got to meet Phyllis in person, but I have spent many hours in the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center going through reading her papers and going through her boxes of material. So in a sense, I feel like she is my friend. I do know her, even though I haven't met her. So I've been thinking a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, and my sort of key theme or leitmotif today is the idea of a charter as a living document. Now, of course, charters like the Freedom Charter or the other charters that are out there in the world are just pieces of paper. But it's really humans. It's activists, writers, artists, lawyers, teachers, such as Phyllis Naidoo, who breathe life into these documents through crafting them, through their commitment to implementing them, and of course through their strategic use of these documents to create social change. Now, I definitely see the Freedom Charter as a living document, certainly because of its longevity and its versatility. Of course, that doesn't mean its meaning has been contested and debated as well. As our keynote speaker was telling us earlier, it was crafted in 1955 or presented and voted upon and adopted at 1955 at the Congress of People in Kliptown, which brought together different political organizations under the Congress Alliance. And this meeting and the adoption of the Freedom Charter represented a significant and important new phase in the anti-apartheid struggle, shaped by the nascent concept of non-racialism developing at the time. I think I might have forgotten one of my documents. There we are. Now, as our keynote speaker explained, the Freedom Charter was developed through gathering the demands of individuals and various organizations across South Africa, which were affiliated to the Congress Alliance, and then synthesizing these into the Charter. Being a historian, I can't give a presentation without drawing on some wonderful treasures from the archives. So up here you can see this is from the Wits Historical Papers, and it is one of the original posters of the Freedom Charter handed out during the gathering in Kliptown on the 26th of June, 1955. Now, one of the topics I've been researching, being a gender and feminist historian, is I've been doing a bit of work on the Federation of South African Women. When this important organization was launched in 1954, it was launched with its own women's charter. In fact, the 1940s and the 50s, when of course the Freedom Charter is also crafted, is an era of charters. I've done a bit of work on a very interesting Indian women's movement charter, which is produced in the mid-1940s, when India is on the cusp of independence. And this charter, in fact, helps to give shape to the mandate on the Commission on the Status of Women. Then, of course, in the late 1940s, you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, another very important charter-type document. In 1954, you have the establishment of the Federation of South African Women and their own charter. And of course, then in 1955, you have the launching and the adoption of the Freedom Charter. Now, the living nature of charters, such as the Freedom Charter, firstly stems from the way in which they are crafted. As our keynote speaker described to us earlier, the Freedom Charter was developed through gathering the demands of individuals and organizations across South Africa who were affiliated to the Congress Alliance and synthesizing these into the Charter. So there was a real grassroots sort of democratic element to bring people's voices and perspectives together. Now, in my research, what I found and what I think is incredibly interesting is that women also contributed significantly to the Freedom Charter, channeled through the Federation of South African Women and other organizations. And that takes me to my second archival treasure, which I'd like to show you. Right. There we are. And then, double click. How to enlarge. Is that? Thank you. Thanks. That would be great. Right. So, in order to gather the voices and the needs of women, the Federation of South African Women held a meeting. This is the poster for the meeting. It's called "What Do Women Want?" or the Demands of South African Women. This was held in the lead up to the Congress of People at Kliptown. And it was through this then that FEDSAW brought more than 200 women together, Black, Indian, colored, and European from across the Reef and Johannesburg. And they together presented, discussed, and voted on an extensive body of demands, which were then submitted and come to be sort of fed into the Freedom Charter as well. So I give this example to show very much how the Freedom Charter is a living document and how its crafting and creation has been shaped by the voices of many different kinds of people, including women. Now, when I went back to look at this extensive document which the Federation of South African Women submitted, which included their demands, and actually read this document, which is known as the Demands of the Women of South Africa, together, next to, in parallel to the Freedom Charter, I discovered something very interesting. So you can see a clear influence. Read alongside the Freedom Charter, the demands of the women of South Africa is evident throughout the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter places express emphasis on the demands of women's equality and the acknowledgement of women's burdens caused by poverty, lack of proper housing, healthcare, and poor education. The Freedom Charter pays specific attention to the needs of mothers, declaring there shall be maternity leave on full pay for all working mothers. All people shall have the right to live where they choose, to be decently housed, and to bring up their families in comfort and security. Free medical care and hospitalization shall be provided for all, with special care for mothers and young children. And there are also several other demands that come from this document, the demands of the women of South Africa, that are reproduced directly in the Freedom Charter. Free travel without restriction from countryside to town, from province to province, and from South Africa and abroad. Freedom to form trade unions, to elect their officers, and to make wage agreements with their employers. Free, compulsory, and universal education for all children. There's also houses, security, and comfort. And the emphasis on international peace and friendship is also partly the influence of FEDSAW and women's contribution to the Freedom Charter. And that, in turn, is itself linked to FEDSAW's unofficial, informal connections with an emerging global South transnational women's movement at the time. So the FEDSAW Women's Charter and the demands of the women of South Africa really provide a great example of how the Freedom Charter is a kind of living document. But as we carry on throughout the 20th century, there are other examples of this as well. The formation of the UDM in the 1980s, again, where the Freedom Charter is adopted or reworked and integrated, shows its living nature, its versatility. And then, of course, the Freedom Charter is also evoked in the transition to democracy and is influential in shaping the post-apartheid constitution in South Africa. So just to conclude, Raymond Suttner has emphasized or argued that perhaps one of the reasons for the longevity of the Freedom Charter has to do with its ability to be interpreted and reinterpreted and reinterpreted and reinvented based on the moment that South Africa finds itself in. I certainly feel today, on the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Charter, that there is scope and opportunity to return to the Charter today and for us to breathe new life into the Charter and to adopt it to tackle some of the challenges that South Africa faces. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Devenish. And Koven spoke about an intellectual engagement with the materials, and thank you, Annie, for giving us such a sterling example of that intellectual engagement. Our penultimate discussant this afternoon is Mr. Donald Gumede. Now, Mr. Gumede has diplomas and qualifications in marketing management, economic policy, and leadership. But importantly, he has been politically active since the 1980s. He has been a member of the UDF and the ANC Underground, and he was a founding member of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. Mr. Gumede has been involved in Parliament, and notably, Mr. Gumede is the son of Archie Gumede, who was the lawyer that practiced with Phyllis Naidoo. So, Mr. Gumede, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you and to give you a chance to have a response.
Good afternoon, Program Director. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to be part of you today, and I sincerely apologize for coming late. I was from Hammersdale, and I could not foresee the traffic on a Friday. I'm very, very sorry for that to all of you. I know your time is important. Firstly, let me thank the presenters of the three panelists, Dr. Fredericks, Mr. Naidoo, and Ma'am Devenish. I think one gathers deeper insights as one engages. There is no one that knows it all. Every time you engage a person sleeping on the street, your insights get deeper. Every time you meet a farmer and have a discussion, your insights become deeper. Every time you meet an American, your insights become deeper. I know that I'm Donald, but I wouldn't like to be called Donald Trump. Donald Trump has done some things that are really selfish, but we are not there. We are about Umama Phyllis Naidoo. Mama Phyllis Naidoo was like a mother to me. I remember that time I was at university, and that time I was Black Consciousness and then she was a charterist, as we call them then. And then we used to have exciting discussions, and until she converted me into non-racialism, non-sexism, and a unitary South Africa that is democratic. Nothing can be more appropriate than reflecting on Mama Phyllis Naidoo on 70 years of the Freedom Charter, because she lived it, she sacrificed for it, she got pain for it, there were tears in her home for it. Mother Phyllis Naidoo went on. She was resilient, she was dedicated, she was motherly as well. I know her for, I listened to Dr. Naidoo talking, and then I remember that she was ordering us from left, right, and center, but always kind. You could feel that kindness in her talk. And going back to the Freedom Charter, in 1976, Nelson Mandela, whilst in prison on Robben Island, in his article, Clear the Path and Confront the Enemy. And let me quote him. The banner that should be hoisted on the rooftops of our country should declare that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and that our country will never be prosperous or free until all our people live in brotherhood, enjoying equal rights and opportunities. Close quote. As we reflect on 70 years of the Freedom Charter, we also know that Mama Phyllis Naidoo was one of the leaders when the Charter was drafted and adopted. She was in the front line when we fought against apartheid, and she was there when the Constitution that embedded the values of the Freedom Charter was drawn. What more could we have asked for from Mama Phyllis Naidoo? I guess she has given all that anyone could have given in their lives. Phyllis Naidoo was a dedicated and resilient cadre. Setbacks were never an obstacle to her revolutionary cause. True to what Nelson Mandela says, do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got up. My resilience. How many times have I fallen down and got up? She fell down when she was arrested. She fell down when she was house arrested and burned. She fell down when she was bombed in Lesotho and got hurt and survived that bombing. But she continued her struggle before going to Zimbabwe, where you met him, Mr. Naidoo. She had experienced some injuries from a parcel bomb. She was willing to face apartheid no matter what. As tough as she was also caring, motherly, disciplinarian, and always wanted kids to do what she saw as right. She was a formidable leader, courageous, with integrity and direction. She wouldn't have allowed the corruption we see today. But to her, it was not about herself. It was about the struggle of putting people first without looking at personal benefits. Given our situation after 30 years of democracy, she would have supported the national dialogue to assist the nation to perform better. More brains, more stakeholders, more insight produces better results. She would have opposed what is happening in Palestine. She would have opposed the unilateralism in the United States and its EU allies. Forgive me for my mother tongue intervention. Sometimes my Zulu interferes with my pronunciation. She would have favored a World Trade Organization approach on tariffs rather than the unilateral Trump approach. She would have opposed corruption in both government and the private sector. She would have favored a better governance of our state institutions. She would have demanded a better crime-fighting strategy involving communities. She would have liked to see a better performing civil society influencing governance. She would have liked to see an education that equips learners and students better for the future they shall have to face. Surely we can perform better as a country. All we need is more people like Phyllis Naidoo. I know she would have promoted a stronger civil society. She would have supported defense of thousands of jobs and growth when engaging people like Trump and other trading partners. The fear that is involved when you negotiate with strong trading partners is that if they increase their tariffs, you stand to lose thousands of jobs, thousands of industries like Mercedes, Toyota, and so forth. So the risks are so high, I think it is better to handle it diplomatically rather than to engage Trump tooth for tooth, because ultimately it's your people. If you put people first, it's not about your ego. It's not about Trump insulting you, attacking you, and so forth. It is about people's jobs. It is about people's livelihoods. And therefore, whilst I understand that we should have national pride, I think it should be people first in our approach. Balance it with that national pride. But at some times, you'll have to put people's jobs first, because sanctions would hurt everyone. If you move for a confrontationary approach, then it should be within a broader strategy. Confrontation doesn't have to be a response. It has to be part of a broader strategy. You should know and predict what the other side is planning and what it would have done. she would have promoted a mass media that is educational, that promotes non-racialism, that promotes non-sexism above profit. I thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Gumede. One of the things that you mentioned, I think, can summarize nicely what you had said was that Phyllis really lived the Freedom Charter. And I think that tallies up with what Koven said about his call, about us to live those values. So ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the final speaker, I will allow a brief question and answer session at the end where you can have a chance to ask a question or make a comment to any of our panelists. So this is an opportunity to think of something that you'd like to ask. Now, our final speaker this afternoon is Mr. J. Nair. Mr. Nair was a teacher for 12 years before, due to his political activism, he had to flee South Africa in 1976, and he settled in Canada. So we're very grateful that he's come all the way as well to come in and address us. Importantly as well, Mr. Nair is the last surviving brother of Billy Nair. And Billy Nair was an activist who was charged with treason in the 1956 trial and also charged with sabotage, and he served 20 years in prison in Robben Island with Nelson Mandela. So it gives us great pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Nair, and to share with us some of your thoughts, your memories, and recollections.
Something to hold on to. Reminds me of the days that I was a little boy living in Sydenham, Durban, growing up in a family that was progressive, active, reactionary, you name it. And as the younger brother of Billy Nair, I'm here today. God willing, I hope to, give you something that we grew up in. Now, thank you for introducing me and allowing me to speak to the, after the panelists, and I know what they were talking about. Where do we start? A little boy in Sydenham, Billy went into prison every now and again. We don't know where he was going to. And coming home and said, "No, I just went out with friends," but meanwhile he was sitting in prison. So as I grew up, and Billy used to also always tell us, education, education, education. And Uncle Gandhi, Uncle Chief, never called him Chief, his Uncle, that's it, Uncle, so-and-so, Uncle. And I remember he sat me on his lap one year when I was in Standard 3, and I topped the school, topped the class. And the words that he left with me, which always rings in my mind, he says, "Jaya, don't you ever stop going to school." He was a teacher, and he said, "Education is something that no one on earth can take away from you." And that still rings well for me and my children, that education first, and then you can go and sort yourself out. And then on the other side, we lost our parents very young, mom and dad. And by 1960, we were youngsters, two of us, Dr. Shad Nair and myself. He's late, and we lived with Billy. And Auntie Phyllis always watched over us, even during the time that we were growing up in Randalls Road. Because Billy went into the treason trial in 1956, just after the Freedom Charter was adopted. And the Freedom Charter is something that I hold very close to my heart in my work that I was doing outside the country. Two things I was doing outside the country is anti-apartheid work through the labor movement, and secondly, education in human rights and labor, and always, putting forward what we did in South Africa, and continued my education in the South African struggle and keeping at it all the time. And I had friends in the trade union movement in South Africa. And when I headed the Human Rights Committee of our union, and I was always at the forefront to always talk about the South African struggle. And that's what Auntie Phyllis said, you left the country, what are you doing? And when I tell her, this is what I was doing, she was proud of me. She says, oh, you are the chip of the old block, and your parents were like that, and now you are carrying the banner and moving forward. And we did a lot. We did a lot, and it's all because of not only Auntie Phyllis, we used to call all the struggle stalwarts auntie or uncle. That's how we grew up. And never called them by name, just auntie, uncle, auntie, uncle. And we had so many functions, and all the functions, the conventions, the conferences, I used to help, assist, and even learned my typing in the Natal Indian Congress office in Savile Street. And we had education within the struggle movement, but not getting involved in the forefront to go and throw stones as our friend does there. The comrade is throwing stones at some. No, I didn't do that, but I was doing the backroom work and learning. And some of the stalwarts, said, Jaya, that's the only way we can use you so that you don't go and end up in prison like somebody else, and then you get demoralized. And what happens is we lose people. So I have been carrying the banner locally and internationally, and brought what we call the knowledge of the struggle, or the information of the struggle from experience to the labor movement in Canada and the United States. And Comrade Gumede is talking about not going after the idiot. What we in Canada did, we said elbows up, because that's a sort of idea that when you play hockey, and when the hockey coach says, go after the opponent and try to strike, elbows up means you're not punching the guy. You're giving the guy an elbow when it goes into the boards. And then we get the puck and go to score the goal. So all these are anecdotal to what we learned in the forefront, what we learned from the struggle stalwarts, and Auntie Lillian Ngoyi, Auntie Fatima Mir. Right up to the time that she passed away, we were in touch. I was always talking to her. This phone, if I go with it across the border in South Africa, in the US, I'll be arrested. Because any brown person that comes across the border or goes across the border If they're carrying electronic equipment, they take it. And this one has got loaded. Politics, human rights, and you name it, it's here. It's my Bible. The Freedom Charter is here. And how old is it? 70 years. And I had it from the day that Billy talked about it. And Billy has one of the excerpts or one of the articles in the Charter that the people shall share the spoils and share South Africa. So all in all, just to give you a picture of my life, and I'm still pursuing it, is people like Uncle Lutuli, Uncle Monty Naika was my doctor, and who else? I can name a slew of people within the movement. They all gave me that knowledge that I have today. And I did what you call courses at Cornell University. I did business courses, part of UNISA. And when I left South Africa in 1976 was because while teaching, the special branch boss, or the what we call Sergeant Naidoo and his gang, were looking for people who instigated the Soweto riots from the education sector. And I was part of, just teachers and the Teachers Society, and very vocal at school and not a friend of the principals. So I got wind from one of the internees on Robben Island, George Naika. His brother was my vice principal, and he says, Jaya, they called me for an interview, and they wanted to know if I was involved with, causing the problems with the students. And then he said, you are close to Billy, so be careful. And that's when I, lock, stock, and barrel, I left. And left in a hurry to London. And Auntie Sonia Bunting, if some of them know who Sonia Bunting was, from the South African Communist Party, told me to head to Canada. I was looking for a place to stay, right? And do things from the other side. And when I went to Canada, they gave me a refugee status on humanitarian grounds, that this is what I did and this is what's happening. They didn't go to the South African Consul General or the High Commissioner and say, did you do this or did you do that to him? Whereas England under Wilson did the same thing, Germany did the same thing, and I didn't go into those countries. But when I came to Canada, and today Canada is standing up to the Trump comrade, and we are still standing up to him. And we are one like Mexico and other parts of Europe. And so and Canada has brought Europe together. And today we are so friendly with Europe that our stuff comes there. And we are getting stuff from South Africa. And South African grapes I'm enjoying. Outspan oranges, which we boycotted during my days. We had sanctions. And we are getting all the stuff that we used to miss, and I'm enjoying them, which you just keep sending them. We will buy them. So having said that, Auntie Phyllis was like a mother to me, in the sense that she knew my mother, she knew my father, and she was married to a relative of mine, which is through marriage, you get the Naidoos are one clan and the what you call. And when I was teaching, I told her this, I said, I'm scared of your father. Her father was Simon David, a very stern inspector. And we didn't want to be inspected by a person like that. Auntie Phyllis said, Jaya, you can handle him. Don't worry about that. You know the way to do it. But these are little things that I carry with me to this day, and I'm very thankful for the panelists, for everybody that spoke about Auntie Phyllis, and to get this opportunity to say something in her favor and in her work. And there was so much that she did. You know, it'll take a day to talk about it, or a day and a half, you know, just around a campfire, around the barbecue stand. What was in her mind also is educate, educate, educate. And that's what I believe in. The more education you give, and depends on what type of education, and if that it goes through the minds of the people, they will support you in your cause. And hopefully one day we have a better South Africa than what I see today. And I end it at that. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Naya. And you started off your speech and ended it off with the importance of education. And I think being in an institution such as this, we cannot understate the importance of that. And thank you as well for carrying our banner abroad for so long and for so far. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our speakers have come from far and they have shared such powerful messages. And this lecture happens only once a year. And I think you will all agree with me that this was a real treat to have these speakers here. And now all of you have been such a lovely and attentive audience. From my vantage point, I really could see the engagement with our speakers and with the lecture. And my compliments to all of you for engaging so well in this and supporting this center. Now I'd like to invite perhaps an opportunity for anyone to make a remark or ask any of the panelists a question. All you need to do is just raise your hand. We'll do one round, and once I point to you, you'll see on the table in front of you there's a little button where you can switch on the microphone. So any questions? Let me just see. Okay, we've got one question there, number 2, number 3, and number 4. All right, we'll do 4 at a time. Okay.
Good afternoon, particularly to the speakers. And then I would like to greet my supervisor, Prof. Gulam Vahid. I'm wearing 2 hats. I'm from KZN Research Institute, but also I'm a PhD student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I'm writing a PhD on Ubaba Gumede. So that's why I was particularly interested on these discussions of today, because I've read quite a few literature on Mama Phyllis Naidoo as well as Ubaba Gumede. So my question is directed to the panel. I just want to pick their brains on what was how did Prof spoke about how Phyllis Naidoo will do some of the cases pro bono. So I've gathered that Ubaba Gumede as well was doing the same thing. So since they were working together, didn't that affect their relationship as well? And, I mean, even the firm itself, if they were doing a lot of pro bono work, because I know Ubaba Gumede, in some instances, he suffered from that because he was helping a lot of comrades in terms of representing them in court pro bono. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take all the questions in this round and then the panel can respond. Professor, yeah.
Can I just make a comment? I can talk loudly, I stand. Sorry, my daughter's having a good laugh. My name is George Devenish. I'm the father of Annie Devenish, and I'm incredibly proud of my Unlike my daughter, I did meet Phyllis Naidoo. She was a member of the local chapter for the abolition of the death penalty, and I was the local chairman. And we took up the issue of the abolition of the death penalty, and we fought for people who are on death row, and I'm only going to mention one, Robert McBride. And I spent several hours on the telephone speaking to various officials. And as a result of the conduct of that local chapter and the other chapters, his death penalty was commuted. Secondly, I met her about 3 or 4 weeks before she died, when she was very frail, and she came as a guest speaker to Rand Park High School, where she addressed the girls about human rights issues. And she had made an effort, even in the last weeks of her life, to make a contribution. And I admired her for that. And it was some years after she had worked with me, and she remembered me clearly. And my last remark is, I am a constitutional lawyer, and I look at this Constitution. We have a good Constitution, not a perfect one. We have a great Bill of Rights, but rights are not self-executing, and we most certainly need activism to put the rights that are on paper into practice. And I'm going to only mention one. We have political equality. We do not have, among others, economic equality. We need to take about 25 million people, mainly African people, who live in dire poverty, into the working and the middle class. And in so doing, we will be moving towards economic equality. And that's what our activism should be about. Among many other things, bringing about economic equality for all our people. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Devenish, my former professor as well. So I feel like I need to read the cases before I speak.
Thank you, and thank you to the speaker and to the panelists. It was really a very rich and rewarding reflection on Phyllis. I just wanted to say very quickly that Phyllis has challenged us to think outside the box, to think laterally, to think beyond borders. And part of that is due to her life as an exile. She really made us think in terms of the region rather than in the narrow, in terms of the narrow nation. My own work on her has dealt with how she's written about others. So biography became a way of telling her story, became a way of autobiography. And that was Phyllis. What I wanted to share very quickly, since we have guests, international guests who happily and thankfully joined us, we really appreciate your presence. Phyllis taught us that we're all one world. And when I was reviewing her work, the Footprint series, I was quite shocked and surprised because in one of the Footprint series, she starts with the story of Chedi Jagali. And that just made me stop in my tracks. And I understood as I reflected on it what she was doing. Here was a person from indentured background, with British Ghana, an activist fighting in his space and time, but walking with us on Grey Street. So Footprints in Grey Street was a mixture of people, Dennis, Brutus, you name them, so many different folk, but also from the Caribbean, and how we're all connected in our histories of resistance, of struggle in our place, but also across time and space. That was Phyllis. And it was just an amazing lesson for all of us. And when you go to Grey Street, how do we walk on our streets thinking of how we actually are accompanied by folk from all over, from different spaces in our world. Thank you. And incidentally, Phyllis's thinking was actually then affirmed when Chedi Jagan was given the Oliver Tambo, companions of Oliver Tambo, by our South African government. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you. And I want to salute all women for tomorrow, which is Women's Day. We really appreciate and respect you. And as Koven said earlier on, I think, we need to see more women leaders amongst us. I am from the Active Citizens Movement, and we are proud to have our chairperson being a woman, Dr. Nora Soneka, an old activist, and we have consciously done that. My question will reflect on the human rights aspect of Comrade Phyllis's life. Recently, we have seen the rise of what I would like to believe, and my organization believes, is human rights violations by organizations such as Operation Dudula and March and March, who have prevented foreigners and undocumented individuals from accessing our healthcare facilities. Now, that goes totally against the grain of South Africa belongs to all who live in it. How would Comrade Phyllis respond to these violations, given her human rights activism? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that first round of questions. I don't think any question was directed to any particular panelist, so I thought I would just start from this side and go across if there's any remarks. So, anything you could possibly... I don't think you can move across. Do you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really fulfilling to get these kinds of questions and responses. I worked hard to try to do justice to Phyllis's legacy, and I feel that you all did. I really think you don't always say to an audience, wow, you did a great job, but you did. You were very interactive. It felt like you really were appreciating it, and I think I've learned a lot, which is great about it. And it's interesting because if we want to label it as xenophobia, I thought a lot that, it was hard to fit everything in. And I felt that, Phyllis lived the frontline states, the Southern African countries. She never felt nationalist. I didn't feel I could extrapolate from 2013. In 2008 was a terrible landmark of xenophobia, but certainly I think we would all agree that Phyllis, who fought for human rights, would be so upset at the kind of situation. I was actually sitting on Addington Beach when people came by and were trying to pull people out of the hospital from the queue, mothers and babies, because they decided they didn't deserve, even though they're in this country and land belongs to all of us. So I think it's great you raised that point, and it's important to keep reminding people, what is this about? Where is it going to take us? Thanks.
Thank you, sir. During those days, really, a lot of people that struggled were not employed. Employers were afraid to employ them because they'd be in trouble with special branch. The government, as a matter of policy, did not employ them. So when they got caught in legal matters, they went then to lawyers that were their comrades. And lawyers that were their comrades assisted them freely, pro bono. So they were doing that job for quite a lot of cases. And among their peers, they were amongst the poorest because of that, but rich in spirit, free in spirit, liberated within. What more then could they have asked? Talking about Umama or Phyllis Naidoo, their office, I think, was in the first floor or second floor in the Kashba area, in Cross Street, where Cross Street is opposite the English market. They had their business. Their business. They handled a lot of matters from people in Robben Island as well. And they trained a lot of black lawyers, like Ranjit, like Jeff Khatebe, and so forth. And were under their tutelage. And some of them qualified, some of them were arrested in the process because they also became politicized by their clients. If you have interacted with Ubabukwala, he was a very, very, very persuasive person. After 5 minutes, you would have crossed the floor. But having said that, I think that humanity, that characteristic of people who, those who know English call mensch, they were menches. How do you pronounce it? A mensch. It's so they empathize with people. They could relate with people, and the scholar, I just forgot your name. I'm getting old. That is studying about Ubabu Achi Gumede. We can freely engage outside on some matters. It wouldn't be a problem. But Umama Phyllis Naidoo was a South African. When you interacted with her, you could not feel that it's an Indian or whatever. She was South African, like Ubaba billionaire. When he talked to you, he said Mfanum Dal or Munna, and they were very, very. They had a very, very special relationship. So the question of identity in South Africa sometimes is overemphasized. And Umamu Phyllis Naidoo addresses that question too. She says that some people call me a South African of Indian origin, but they don't call themselves South Africans of British origin or of Holland origin. If I have a problem somewhere else in the world, I wouldn't go to India or somewhere else. I would come to South Africa because South Africa is my motherland. And that was the message. And then there is a book by Kiru Naidoo, Paul David, and Sylvan Naidoo, and then there's the fourth person. I just forget the name. Oh, yes, Chulila. Yeah, it's a long name. Yes, they say that they prefer that we call them Indian African. Is it the other way around? what is the identity. But that book is called Indian Africans. They are Africans. Then they can have any other description, like I can have any other description, like Umgoni or Umzulu. But I'm an African and I'm a South African first. When we engage, let us engage in that. But cultural and upbringing factors come into play. But let us be aware that we are all South Africans of equal value, equal before the Constitution, equal before the law, and equally accessible to all rights. And I thank you.
Can I say something? As a practicing human rights activist and educator, we have the same problem in Canada. We have people who come into the country, and some of them as refugees. Straight away they are examined, and once they are classified as a refugee, coming on humanitarian grounds, get everything, from healthcare to education. The only problem we have, because of our neighbor to the south and the way he reacted in his first term and now the second term, every brown person, any dark-skinned person has to flee because they pack them up and ship them to wherever. So we have a flood of foreigners in, and what we do is classify them and then we give them everything. But we have a problem, two major problems, is the funding because of capital, and secondly, it's the shortage of homes. So how do we address that? So we want the business community or the somebody to start building some type of home so that we can house them. But that causes animosity between the local Canadian of whatever stock. They frown upon the intervention by these foreigners. They don't want to accept them. So that's why in my training as a human rights activist, human rights educator, is to use a simple term, live and let live. We are living on the land, and we are not supposed to be on this land because this is indigenous people's land. We are visitors on this land. And that is why I forgot to do a land acknowledgement in all my speeches from the time we had the TRC in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where Mr. Sinclair, he said that you are all visitors, but we welcome you here because you are part and parcel of the nation. So respect us. So the respect has to be shown, and solidarity, peace, everything comes into play. But that is education again. If you don't educate the masses, they're always against. And you've got classism, we have that problem, and we've got a religious problem. And our friend, or so-called friend, the guy from India, is sowing seeds of dissension. And the seeds of dissension are such that you find a Hindu against a Muslim, a Hindu against a Hindu, and you'll find people in we have a suburb called Brampton. There are all kinds of religions there, and all kinds, the Sikhs on one side, and they fight each other. So how do you address that? We have a major problem, and it's sort of building up. We have a problem with the South, and now we have a problem from within. So as I say, it's education, and the school system has to get involved, and social activist groups. And I belong to the social democrat. I'm a social democrat because I show a little bit of color, but inside, but work with the social democratic movement, and that's the party that I support. Education, tolerance, all that should come through the family, through the school system. So that is something that we are having a battle with, and it's a world problem.
Thank you. Annie, I'll give you the last word. Yeah.
So just to respond to the comment or question about xenophobia in South Africa, I thought that Auntie Betty said it beautifully earlier when she said that Phyllis Naidoo challenges us to think beyond borders. And she's taught us that we are all one world, and that this kind of sense of kind of connection with others is fundamentally to do with her own experience of exile. Just to say, in kind of engaging with her archive and the wonderful letters that she's left behind, I've really been struck by her deep interest and knowledge about struggles in other parts of the world. So I've come across a sort of letter where a friend or a colleague is telling her about caste discrimination in India, another letter where they're discussing, discrimination against First Peoples in America and Canada. And I think that, perhaps we could say, I know this term has been bandied around a lot, but she really did have a profound understanding of the intersectional nature of injustices and inequalities. And this was also expressed by her powerful sense of solidarity, that you've got to have solidarity with the struggles of people elsewhere in the world. So I think she would have been deeply saddened by what's been happening in South Africa, and she would have called us to take action.
Okay, so I think that brings our Q&A session to a close. The archives of the university...
Could I just make a comment on what Phyllis Naidoo would have done in relation to these foreigners? Phyllis Naidoo was an attorney, and the first thing she would have done would have gone to the Constitution. Section 7 says all the people in South Africa have rights. All. So foreigners have rights. How they got here is a problem, I know, but the Constitution says all. If they land at a hospital, according to the Constitution, they are by right entitled to help. Furthermore, that applies by the Constitutional Court to sex workers, it applies to prisoners. And in this we've got it right. The sex workers case said that sex workers have labour rights. The August case said people who are in prison are entitled to vote. And I'm pleased we've got that right. So that's how she would have solved it as an attorney. She would have gone to the Constitution, Section 7, all have rights. Whether you're a prostitute, or whether you are a prisoner, or whether you are a foreigner. There are some rights that are reserved, the right to vote, and certain rights relating to employment. And in that regard, our Constitutional Court has got the position right, and Phyllis Naidoo, as a good attorney, would have got it right.
I mean, nobody can dispute with the comments it made here. But I have to raise this perspective. It worries me when we talk about xenophobia. We correctly criticize those who stop people from getting access. But at some level, we have to start looking at our government as to what it does to support governments around us that do nothing to provide the rights for their own people, that do nothing to feed their people, and force millions of people to come into this country. We played the Mugabe game. We stayed quiet. We took photo shoots with him while he was killing his people, and we thought that was progressive. So I think that when we raise the xenophobia issue, we should be also concurrently not going just for working class people whose interests are being threatened in their own perspective, either real or imagined, and in some cases real. But we actually question our leaders who today in our society allow anything to happen across our borders in the name of combined liberation movements. And that's bullshit. We need to deal with that before we start only questioning what working class people live. Where you and I think here is a middle class perspective around this. We only talk about the people who are doing wrong around xenophobia. We don't talk about our leaders who are promoting the mass expulsion from the neighboring countries into our country.
And okay, so I think that that's an appropriate point to leave us with food for thought. Just a final word, the archives, the center, it's full of pictures and documents and papers, but they remain in silence and they wait for a researcher to come through, open those boxes and uplift them and read the stories. But events like this, these lectures and these discussions, they're an opportunity for us to give a voice to the contents of those boxes, to come out again into the open, to once again inspire us and give us a chance to reflect. So I'm very grateful to the panelists for giving us that opportunity. And to bring the session to a close, I have great pleasure to just invite one of our portfolio heads from the Library Services, Dr. Pravesh Sukram, to give a vote of thanks and to bring the proceedings to a close. But I hope we'll have a little chat outside as well, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sobran. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this was a great celebration of Dr. Phyllis's Naidoo's life. I think what we've done here today and the lecture that we've had is, and the discussions really tells us a lot about Dr. Phyllis. But as we draw close to our 2025 Dr. Phyllis Naidoomemorial lecture, it is my privilege to actually deliver the vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, our heartfelt appreciation to our keynote speaker, that's Ms. Fredericks. Ma'am, thank you very much indeed for your chat. And then to our panelists, that's Professor Naidoo and Dr. Devenish, also Mr. Gumede and Mr. Nai as well. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions. Greatly, greatly appreciated. To our chief guests, this is Ms. Fredericks. Your address, ma'am, was not only deeply insightful, but also profoundly inspiring. And you have brought about Dr. Naidoo's legacy to life, reminding us of her unwavering dedication to justice, equality, and education. Your words have challenged us to think critically and act purposefully. Thank you very much indeed. And to the great audience we have here, it's been absolutely great, the interaction we had. Thank you very much. And also, I just want to mention our university executive, faculty, staff, students, and also you distinguished guests. I must say that your presence here and your participation has been greatly appreciated. Folks, we need to just acknowledge also our international guests that are here. All right, Mr. Naya spoke from Canada, but you are South African, sir. And also to our guests, international guests we have here, is a Gumede conference that's taking place, and we want to just acknowledge you and thank you very much for making this possible. And we have visitors here from, amongst other places, Trinidad and Tobago. I recall meeting people from there. Also Ghanaians and Mauritius, UK, United Kingdom, India, Fiji, and Netherlands, just to name a few, right? Thank you very much for taking time to come up to this lecture. I'm hoping you're taking great memories back with you as you go back to your countries. Folks, we also like to wish and to acknowledge our dedicated contributions from our teams that work tirelessly behind the scenes, all right, and who made this event possible with in terms of logistics, coordination, and our technical support and value staff. This I need to actually acknowledge corporate divisions, our corporate folks here. We've got our colleagues from corporate relations here. Thank you very much. We've got our colleagues from ICS, that's Information and Communication Services. They're all in the background. Thank you, folks. And also RMS, our security division here. And at this juncture, folks, I want to actually just acknowledge, firstly, the advisory committee of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center. All of you have really went ahead and made this happen, initiated the Dr. Phyllis Naidoomemorial lectures. Folks, I know my colleagues are not going to be very pleased with me, but I want to personally ask our manuscript librarian of the Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, Thiru, please stand up. Thank you very much for all your contribution. We got our head of special collections, Senzo Mki. Senzo, please, and thank you very much indeed. And Roshni Patha. Roshni is a portfolio head for special collections. Rosh, thank you very much for all your work. You know, folks, your commitment ensures that the focus remains where it should be, on honoring the life, courage, and impact of Dr. Phyllis Naidoo. As we leave here today, may we each carry forward the spirit of inquiry, resilience, and service that defined Dr. Naidoo's life. Let us transform the inspiration we have gained into tangible action that uplifts and strengthens our communities. Prof spoke about what we need, our constitution. Things are happening in South Africa that really we need to sort here and around the world. It's very heartbreaking to actually see people starving, and what's happening in terms of foreigners in our country. Folks, we need to sort. And Prof told us about our constitution, and our Master of Ceremonies is a student of Prof, all right? And speaking about our program director, Dr. Subran, thank you very much for how you coordinated this. We greatly appreciate it. Folks, thank you very much. We look forward for you being to welcoming you again to our lectures, what we have in terms of Gandhi Luthuli and our special collections and also the events. Dr. Subran also spoke about our Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center. We got all Dr. Phyllis's documents there that are being digitized at the moment for us to have access and for preservation as well. So please, Thiru and his team are there to welcome you. Please pop over, especially to our international guests. You might not have an opportunity to come back here. Go ahead and speak to Thiru. You could actually access this online as well, and he will tell you how. Folks, I just want to thank you again for taking time up to be with us this afternoon. Travel safely, and we look forward to actually engaging with you again. Thank you very much.